so that we don't get behind at all, I think we probably will go ahead and start. So I'm Joseph Owen. I am the coordinator of medical education for radiology at UK and abdominal imager. Did a fellowship in body MRI and have been at UK for 6 years now. And so I'm glad that everyone has been able to join us today. We're going to have a good program. Hopefully it's very informative and practical. I know that certainly the program coordinators put together a really nice, very practical video for everyone.
Joey,
that being, yep.
Can I ask that we just start the program with a moment of silence in honor of the victims of 9/11?
Absolutely. I think that's a good plan. It's a very memorable day 20 years later, right?
Exactly. It's been
we'll take about 30 seconds and everyone just be thoughtful.
Thank you.
All right, with that, so today we're going to start with the chairs and we'll have them each speak on a topic related to radiology. We'll then move on to program directors and then program coordinators. There will be time for all the attendees to ask questions directly with each of the different panelists. So please do either unmute your microphone or you can ask in the question and answer box. And somebody did ask, are we all automatically muted? And that is true. All the attendees will be automatically muted. So believe that I can allow you to talk. So you would just want to raise your hand and that will hopefully bring you to the top of the list. And I can, or you can certainly put in into the question and answer box. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start with Dr. Oats' lecture. So let me get the PowerPoint open here and we will get started.
All right, thanks, Joey. So we'll wait for the slides to come up. Joey is going to run the slides and I do have a lot of animation, so this is going to be kind of fun to do this.
All right, is everyone able to see the screen? Does it look correct?
Yes, I can see
Excellent.
it. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is a few different things. Training options in radiology. We're going to touch on diversity and inclusion and then end with practice opportunities. So I do want to disclose that I am a trustee for the ABR and I will have a slide that does touch on the ABR 16-month pathway in nuclear radiology. Otherwise, my talk really doesn't have anything to do with the ABR, so there's no conflict there. So let's start with the training options. Next slide. So we have diagnostic radiology and interventional radiology, and we will develop each of these over the next few slides. So if we think about our toolkit, we had a lot of tools back in the day. And then now you can see what our tools look like. We have a lot of tools. So it is a very complex field, a lot of different things we can do. And we will hear more about these tools over the next few talks. Next slide. So pheromones, what attracts us to radiology? So here are some of my ideas. We are essential in healthcare. And I think everyone goes into radiology knowing that we are going to be key players in the healthcare arena. We influence decision-making in almost every patient's care, sometimes multiple decisions in a particular patient. We have a multidisciplinary role. So we are involved with every specialty and we do multidisciplinary consultations. and we're really collaborative in that we work with all other specialties. And I think we are not only needed, but I do believe we are respected by other specialties for our knowledge and our skills. Every radiologist can do multimodality image-guided procedures. We think of it as interventional radiology, but even the practicing diagnostic radiologist will do some procedures. And then lastly, my field, which is nuclear radiology, radiotheranostics is really coming into its own. And that is that we use radioactive treatments based on diagnostic imaging. So we'll do the diagnostic imaging workup, then we'll treat, and we'll follow up with diagnostic imaging to see how the treatment worked. And this is really a new horizon that all of you will be involved in some way. So now let's break it down and go through some details. So in terms of residencies, we have the 4-year diagnostic radiology residency, and then we have the other, and that will lead to ABR certification in diagnostic radiology. And then we have the 5-year integrated interventional radiology residency, and that will lead to ABR certification in IR and DR. If you press the button, there we go. So we have 2 options for ABR certification, diagnostic radiology, and then IR, DR, which is interventional radiology, diagnostic radiology. So every interventional radiologist is a diagnostic radiologist at the beginning of their career, as it were. Then IR can be done after the completion of a diagnostic radiology residency. So if you're not in the integrated program, you can still become an interventional radiologist by doing a 1-year independent IR residency. It's akin to a fellowship, really, with the early specialization in interventional radiology, ESIR pathway, that is embedded within the diagnostic radiology residency program. I know some of this is going to get a little confusing, but this will be developed over the course of the next couple of hours. Or you can do a 2-year independent IR residency, again, akin to a fellowship, without the ESIR pathway. So next, yeah, and that leads to ABR certification in IRDR. So both of those different approaches or pathways will lead to board certification in IRDR. Next slide. Yeah, thanks. So the training options during residency, what can you do as a trainee? You can participate in that 16-month pathway in nuclear radiology that I mentioned, and I'll develop that in a moment. You can do this ESIR pathway in your residency. And you can do mini fellowships in your senior year. Typically, these mini fellowships are offered in senior year. They might be offered earlier in the residency as well. But there are many opportunities, depending on the program you're at, for these various different training opportunities within the standard residency program. Now, after residency, what can you do? So you've completed your DR residency, what can you do? You can do any number of 1 or 2 year fellowships. There's a whole bunch of different fellowships. Some are ACGME accredited, others are not. The subspecialty that you choose to do, and most radiologists today, and we'll develop this over the next few slides, most radiologists are subspecialty trained and practice within a subspecialty. Even in a community practice, they have 1 or more subspecialty interests. That makes you marketable and leads to career satisfaction. So let me just talk about the ABR 16-month nuclear radiology pathway for a moment and share some statistics. So integrated modalities are really have come into their own over the last couple of decades and continue to evolve. SPECT CT and PET CT, and there's even PET MRI that I'm not going to mention. So these are 2 modalities attached together to create a hybrid unit that has two parts. This image up here shows you CT and SPECT imaging combined into 1 modality. You can do radioactive iodine treatments, which are really important for hyperthyroidism and for thyroid cancer, and parenteral therapies, for example, for neuroendocrine tumors. You can become a Nuclear Regulatory Commission authorized user for all therapeutic radiopharmaceuticals through this pathway. And then you will be eligible to sit for the nuclear radiology subspecialty certification examination through the ABR. So you have an extra piece of paper that speaks to your credentials. Or you can do a traditional fellowship after residency. So you do the 16-month pathway within your 4-year diagnostic radiology residency, and then you can add another fellowship in a different subspecialty, for example, neuroradiology or pediatric radiology or what have you. And that will increase your marketability across a variety of practice settings. So you're essentially double fellowship trained. So let me give you some statistics about this pathway. I'm not going to talk about it too much. So just a couple of days ago, here are the statistics. Across the country, we have enrolled 137 trainees. UK has graduated 3. There are 58 participating programs around the country. And so that's, roughly say a third or so of the, maybe 40% of the training programs are participating in the pathway. Many of the training programs have multiple enrollees, and there's actually one program that has enrolled 11 trainees since the beginning of the program in 2017. So it has really taken off. This program is really producing a lot of nuclear radiologists out into the practices, which we need. Now the ESIR pathway, I'll just mention this briefly. Again, you'll hear more about it later. So the pathway is embedded within the diagnostic radiology residency. And here are some of the requirements here. It's 12 months within that DR residency program, 8 months of IR, 1 month of ICU, and then 3 IR related months. And you have to do a certain number of procedures, 500 procedures. And then if you do the ESIR pathway and you graduate from that pathway within your DR program, then you are you have advanced placement into the 2nd year of the independent IR. So you basically cut a year off of your post-residency training by doing the ESIR within the DR training program. So many fellowships come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. The ACGME allows up to 16 months in a single discipline or subspecialty within the DR or IR residency program. There are program-specific opportunities. So you really have to, when you do your interviewing for your residencies, maybe you can ask about this. What kind of mini fellowships are embedded within that residency? What are the opportunities that would be available to you? Usually they're in the senior year, again, after the core exam is done at the end of the 3rd year. So that's when most programs would offer these mini fellowships. So you can explore things that you would like to learn more about. Now, be aware, though, that these mini fellowships do not lead to subspecialty certification eligibility at the board level. These are just to enhance your own learning, maybe explore something that you don't understand very well, you want to learn it better, or something that you might never do again, but you want to know enough about it in case you're asked to do it in practice, for example. And it helps you to prepare for that traditional fellowship as well. If you are going into neuroradiology, maybe you want to get a bit of a head start by spending a little extra time in your senior year learning neuroradiology, for example. So traditional 1-year fellowships, I'm going to show you a lot of information on this slide. And again, you can look back at this for more information later. The ACGME accredited fellowships are shown here, and some of them are on a match system, and some lead to ABR subspecialty certification. So again, you can see the list here. And then there are many non-accredited fellowships, depending on the residency, depending on the institution. There will be many different varieties: body imaging, chest imaging, breast imaging, which has a match, even though it's not accredited, women's imaging, MRI is maybe a fellowship unto itself as well. So all kinds of fellowship opportunities. So now let me touch on diversity and inclusion just briefly. And so here's just one thing to know is that the American College of Radiology, which is what ACR stands for, developed a commission for women and diversity back in 2013. So it is recognized within our field that diversity and inclusion is really an important part of our specialty, and we do have some catching up to do. So you'll see that on the next few slides. So this is a slide that I put together showing the ERA statistics from 2008 to 2020, and every other year being shown here. So women's interest in diagnostic radiology residency has pretty much been flat around 28 to 1 year it was 31% of the applicant pool were women. So again, we are not at all 50%, even though medical students are 50% women. Radiology lags behind. The next slide really touches on race and ethnicity. And again, these are data from EROS from 2008. I'm just showing 3 different time points here. And you can see that for Black or African American, we're really hovering around 5 or 6%. And then for Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx, as it's now called, or Spanish origin, around 8%. So we really, again, we do not have the kind of diversity we would ideally like to have, given the patient population and given the rest of the workforce and the communities that we work in. Next slide. So now a few points. So roughly in practices, there's roughly 28% of radiologists in practice are women. So it's less than a third. And then in terms of the underrepresented in medicine, it's less than 10% in practice today. And so there are many local initiatives, there are many national initiatives. For example, here at UK, we have a diversity and inclusion ambassador within radiology. The Dean's office has these DIA, these diversity and inclusion ambassadors in every department, and we have one in radiology. The RSNA in 2020, so the Radiological Society of North America, a major organization in radiology. If you've not heard of it, you will. And back in 2020, the theme was diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you can see that this is really front and center within our radiology world today. Of course, unconscious bias and microaggressions need to be recognized and need to be managed and are part of all of us. I mean, everyone has unconscious bias, and microaggressions or these behaviors will happen in every workplace. And so we need to be aware of them and try to mitigate them as best we can to create a more inclusive and diverse workplace. Then we want to create pipelines. So right now I consider it a funnel, but we want to really create pipelines from even college to medical school, but medical school to residencies. And that's really what we're all about today. And some of these pipelines will have different sizes. So that's why I'm showing different size pipes, but we want to go from the funnel to the pipeline. Let me touch on practice opportunities. So we have diverse practice settings, and that's shown on this slide from the Journal of the American College of Radiology here. And there's really been pretty flat since 2020, and you can see the different kinds of practices. So private practice is this blue line at the top, and you can see that that has been the dominant kind of practice setting, but you can see academic or university is closely sort of behind at around 20% or so, up to 30%, depending on where you look. And then you've got hospital-based practices, you've got multi-specialty clinics, you've got corporate employees. Teleradiology is also part of that corporate employee. Some of the groups are mega groups, and we'll hear more about that later. So about 84% of radiologists practice full-time. 68% of practices have part-time radiologists. So it is a field that if you want to practice part-time, there are opportunities to do that. Remote work as a teleradiologist, if that's what you prefer to do, that is available to you in practice settings. So there is risk reward, and groups are hired and fired. So I'm just putting this here because this is my personal opinion, is that when you're in private practice, you really are taking a risk, but there is a higher reward because they generally are compensated higher. But there's risk in that the groups can be fired fairly quickly. And we've seen this locally, even in one of our community settings here in Lexington. So groups can come and go at a whim, okay? So I feel that academics is a more secure kind of position to be in. So again, just go back, Joey. So I feel that there's job security in academics, but it's also, again, it's just my opinion that it's a higher calling. We're really teaching the next generation. We're doing great clinical care and often more complex clinical care than a private community setting might do. And we're also subspecialized. And I feel there's a lot of satisfaction in that subspecialization. So let's look at some of the trends. So this was back in 2019. There were, roughly 1,000 to almost 2,000 projected hires within radiology. It is a field that we really need radiologists. So there aren't enough radiologists to fill all of the positions in academic or in private right now. Back then, and this is the most current data I was able to find, breast, neuroradiology, and interventional radiology were the fields that were going to have the most opportunities. However, what I would advise you, Joe, if you can press do what you like. So even though I'm saying here in this slide that breast might have the most opportunities, neuro might have the most IR, you need to do what you really like to do, because there will be opportunities in every subspecialty. Now, one of the points I do want to kind of, maybe reinforce a bit here is that most first-time hires are going to have a fellowship. Very few, less than 10%, will not have had a fellowship. So fellowships are really, I think, critically important to consider doing a fellowship. A non-fellowship trained radiologist really has less marketability and in my opinion, has less job satisfaction. Again, my opinion. Now, one of the things to bear in mind too, for those of you who are interested in radiology, it's not just that the jobs are available now, they will be available going forward. So when you finish residency, when you finish fellowship, when you get into the job market, there will be jobs. There will be plenty of jobs, because the workforce is an aging workforce. And as those folks retire, there will be more radiology jobs available. The need for radiologists will only increase over time. So that's job security for all of you. So what does it look like? What does our life look like? So we are problem solvers. We take a multifaceted knowledge. We have all of this knowledge that we've learned within radiology and in medicine, and then we apply it to a whole bunch of different problems. And we're able to then practice radiology very effectively. We direct, oversee, supervise all kinds of things in radiology, all of the imaging, all of the therapies, we perform procedures. It's a very rich life. It's a very satisfying life. We provide oversight for quality and patient safety, and this cannot be understated. We are really the ones responsible for taking the best care of our patients, working with the radiology team of technologists and nurses and others. In academics, of course, we do teaching, we do research. And so we're able to do all kinds of just really cutting edge work, biomarkers, for example. So we do high volume, we do a great variety, and we're never bored. I am never bored. I wish I was on occasion, but I have never been bored, okay? So here's just one example, just to show you an image. So this is a technetium 99M Cesta MIBI SPECT CT image, and you can see the finding. That the circle will pop up here in a moment. There you go. And so if anyone knows what this is a, next one, Joe. Yeah, this is a deep paraesophageal hyperplastic parathyroid gland. This is responsible for the patient's hyperparathyroidism, and the surgeon now knows where to find this gland deep in the paraesophageal region, not right next to the thyroid, it's deep. So just in closing, so I get great personal satisfaction at the end of every single day. And again, as I said, I've never been bored. I feel very fortunate that I made the right choice to be a radiologist and a nuclear radiologist. And I love radiology. So that's it. And I'm glad to answer questions, maybe either now or later. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Oats, thank you very much. I think next if I'm correct, Dr. Contractor is going to go next, and then Dr. Contractor, you said you wanted to try and share your slides. Is that you want to? I think I can stop screen sharing, and then you should be able to share.
Right. You need to stop sharing, so I could. Okay. Dr. Owen, I think you might have, because I might have to restart my Zoom, so maybe it's better if you just do it.
That sounds good. I can do it. No problem at all.
Yeah.
So let's get yours going here. And
I think you might even be able to give me control of the slides. There is a feature
okay,
that
yeah, I
allows
can
me
try and
to-
do that.
Yeah.
So there's up, and
there we go.
I'm gonna give you, I think you can accept control of the screen now.
Yes, I think so. It's asking me to stop. I'm sorry, guys. You are controlling.
It looked like you have control. Yeah, there we
Okay,
go.
there we go. Yeah. All right. If you can just go back now, I don't know how to go back.
Yeah.
There we go. All right. Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Owen, for putting this thing together, and thank you, Dr. Oats and Mahoney, for having me on as part of this group. This is fantastic. As some of you might know, I came here to Louisville last year, so it's been an absolute great first year, and just being in this environment is it's again reinvigorating, I guess, for myself and my career. I think Dr. Oates covered, a whole lot of what I might have to say over years, and I think that was a great, sort of presentation covering all aspects of training and practice. So one of the things that has fascinated me, because I've been, uh, acutely aware of this process over the past 20 years, is how these mega sort of private, groups are forming, and who's forming them, and who's paying for them, and how they are being controlled. And it's likely if of the 100-something folks that are on your students that you end up in radiology, I think probably about half of you would be working for one of these groups. So I think it's important that you understand what kind of practice models you might get into. So I'll try and present some of what is happening right now, and probably will change very soon. Um, all right. So as of now, we've got about 30,000 something practicing radiologists, and that includes the full and part-time radiologists. Our yearly revenues, again, it's a small drop in the ocean, right? I mean, 18 billion is nothing, and this is just really the professional revenues. These are not the technical revenues, which account for the vast majority of imaging expenditure in the U.S. As Dr. Oates said, there were a bunch of private groups scattered across the country, and these range in size, from 2 to 20 to 200. And these really were the dominant employers, up until the mid 2010s. In the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen, two really breakout companies called Envision and Rad Partners that have really sort of started to dominate, most of this private practice market or employment out in the country. So, up until the year 2000, there was 0 transactions for a corporate acquisition of a radiology practice. And, and this is again back in 2015. And I can tell you that in 2021, there's a whole lot more happening. So again, as Dr. Oates pointed out, academic practices, have their own charm and have their own sort of claim to fame. I've been in academics, all my life, and I can tell you it's an absolutely fantastic way to practice your medicine and your skill and do all the things that you really went to medical school for. But again, these, we do lag behind in terms of market share, right? I mean, there's only so many academic radiologists out there. There's been some practices that have made inroads into sort of a regional practice, just like the bigger groups have. And I know Dr. Mahoney's group and even Dr. Oates' group, they've also started taking on some smaller satellite hospitals and clinics outside their own main centers, as has we done in Louisville also. The biggest practices really are, UPMC, NYU, and the Cleveland Clinic in terms of regional read. So just to sort of go over what I just said previously, which is most, practices have been small. Um, and really with PACs having come onto the field about 25, 30 years ago, that's when, groups started saying that maybe we can have, folks offsite and have in different locations and start to merge practices. And this will also fuel, as Dr. Oates said, with the rapid explosion in IR growth, and lots of practices found that they had adequate diagnostic coverage but not enough interventional coverage. So could you merge practices to be able to do that? And that's how these sort of slow organic alliances started to happen in the early 2000s, 2010s. And really the recent mergers have been fueled by money that really is beyond the scope of a traditional practice, right? I mean, you're talking about 500 and 700 million dollars worth of acquisitions that really have led to these mega groups being formed. And the biggest groups right now, even though they may say X, Y, and Z radiology or A, B, and C radiology, are really controlled by 2 or 3 big venture or corporate back groups. So what were some of the limitations of smaller or smallish groups? Well, everybody wanted 24/7 coverage, and everybody wants 24/7 coverage. And by the way, they want them to be subspecialty covered, right? Radiologists, on the other hand, want some kind of lifestyle. I mean, they do want to turn their computer screens off at some point. We do want very robust administrative support. If you've been in a reading room as a student and try to figure out the 30 different referrings to call, if you don't have the right administrative support, that life can be a nightmare very soon. Groups want negotiating power with health systems. I mean, there's a whole lot of coalescence happening within healthcare systems. Again, in Louisville, Kentucky, One Health, which was the dominant health system, has been taken over by UFL, the university system. So there's a whole lot of merger acquisition happening at the higher health system level. And then, groups also want more negotiating power with insurance companies. So if you're a group of 100 providers in a city, you have far more leverage with an insurance company than if you are a group of 10 providers in a city. So that's another reason that's driving these corporate acquisitions. So what are some inherent deficiencies that we have currently? Well, as Dr. Oates said, there's just too many open positions, and it's really hard to fill them. Lots of private groups, when they were at their heyday, they really thrived because there was a lot of lack of transparency, and the head honchos made a killing, and the young guns were left to work without a whole lot. Groups started losing contracts when health systems started to merge. Again, going back to the groups, there was a lot of financial dishonesty. I mean, I remember being offered jobs at a couple of these private practices with really very creative contracts and nothing that I could understand. And, my attorneys basically warned me against signing such contracts. The workload expectations, they continue to, to keep hitting us, not just in private practice, but also in academics. People say that you don't leave a bad job, but you lead a bad leader, because that's really what happened in a lot of private practices. Groups run wrong, for the wrong reasons. Folks started getting depleted. Certain sections of or segments of the country still remain in a, quote unquote, undesirable location, right? I mean, you have rural practices that are really struggling to make coverage needs, and inadequate staffing. Here's the demand and supply curve. I mean, as you can see, the number of CT and MR exams, if you've been a medical student on medicine surgery, there is no physical examination happening on any patient anymore. The physical exam is either an ultrasound, a CAT scan, or an MRI, and that's just what it is. And and by the way, our ability to cover for them has been really restricted in terms of the number of people we've had. What's that led to? Well, it's led to lots of people getting burnt out. About half of us, this is not good news, report that we've had some symptom or the other of getting burnt out, even though it's fun and I wouldn't do anything else with my professional life. As Dr. Oates said, it still feels stressful, right? I mean, back about 12, 15 years ago, the number of studies that were being done on a per capita radiologist was a lot lower than what it is done now. And even now, administration seems to feel that we can do more and we can do, we can read faster. And it's not just the number of studies, but if you look at an MRI exam, for instance, the number of sequences, series has just exponentially gone up. I mean, back when I trained in the late 90s, we still had film. So we were kind of limited with the number of, series and sequences that you would do because you had to print everything out. Well, right now, everything's electronic. So you can have like 300 series of a certain, study and have to read each image. So it takes a lot. It takes a toll, being a radiologist. And I don't want to sugarcoat that, but it is not all that easy. On top of all that, here's an editorial that an ER physician put out. And, this is just to show you how misunderstood a lot, of us and a lot of our colleagues are. A well-renowned ER physician, really had the gall to write an opinion piece, really that says the life cycle of a parasitic specialist. And this is really incredible because, and this is, of course, this opinion is not shared by most of him, but it is there that most of the clinicians or a lot of clinicians would think that we do nothing more than come in on Monday morning with a cup of coffee and pick up where the poor ED physicians have been reading all night long or all weekend long, and then we just bill and collect on those studies. So it just goes to show about how the different perspectives can change what you do. So early 2010s, lots of people were very wrong and very right about where the field of radiology is going. If you recall 10 years ago and everything has cycles, radiology was one of the specialties that nobody wanted to go into because everybody was predicting the death of radiology because all these tele-radiologists are going to take away your jobs and it's all going to go all downhill. And unfortunately, or fortunately, that doomsday thing has not gone correct. And again, back in the early 2000s, there were folks that were writing about the threat of a corporate takeover and what we can do and cannot do. Some folks actually said maybe we should unionize. So really, what are, again, just going back to what really contributes to consolidation and corporate takeover of radiology? Well, no secret. Oh, sorry, can you go back on that, Dr. Wan? Yeah. So no secret on that, but imaging reimbursements have been going down fairly consistently. In fact, there's a plan now afoot by CMS to cut reimbursements even more. Capital expenses keep going up. I mean, MRs and CAT scans are not cheap, piece of equipment to acquire and maintain. And practices across the different specialties are consolidating. So you don't just have radiology, but you also have anesthesia, emergency medicine, orthopedics, gastroenterology. All of these, are also being subject to the same market forces that we are being subject to, right? And again, everybody wants 100% subspecialty reads, and everybody wants them read within an hour. So that's just a really tall task to. Okay. So along with the private groups merging, you've got venture and private capital, because there's lots of money lying around and free money, and this growth has really been exponential over the past few years. And the final goal for some of these groups, like Rad Partners, might be to have an IPO and and cash out on that front. Envision Radiology is already a public traded company, so. So how does it help, the radiologists that are looking to get bought out? Well, the current partners make a good exit. I mean, they frequently get 4 and 5 times their current salary as an initial payout, and then they get a long-term contract at a lower salary, but they've got their money and they've got their income for the rest of their lives. And also for some of the smaller groups, without the administrative support, the billing support, the coordination support, it allows them to focus on their clinical work and not worry about, those practice management aspects of their work. And then you've got a better lifestyle because you've got now somebody else covering your after hours reads. Downsides, as you can imagine, you lose autonomy because now you're part of a big conglomerate, and decisions are being pushed down and you're being told what is right and what is wrong. And clearly, if you're early career versus late career, you have differing objectives, right? I mean, if you're early career, you're looking at the next 10, 20, 30 years of your practice. And if you're late career, you're just looking to, sort of get a good landing pad somewhere and move on. We risk getting further commoditized. There were always fears, and there still are that, and it's not just fears, but it actually happens now where there's a pay to, click study. So if you read a CAT scan, you get X dollars. You read a MR, you get Y dollars, and that's sort of how a lot of these groups operate. And then you're always on the RVU hamster, right? You can't ever catch up, and you can't ever keep up. So what are some alternatives that I think, being in academics, we could, pose as a challenge to these big, growing groups? Well, I think, one thing is to, if you can beat them, join them, right? So I know in Louisville, we do have RAD partners as a backup provider for overnight reads, because, we just don't have enough people to do all those things. So you could collaborate with them, and you could sort of and insist on some kind of quality metrics, and insist on some kind of quality provision. And a lot of these practices do bring value because they have well entrenched physicians as well that put out good best practices. We're also looking at expanding out regionally, so we are looking at expanding into Louisville, and then maybe 20 miles, 50 miles around Louisville. Academic groups are now creating what are called community radiology groups to cover these smaller practices. And then lastly, we could, have collaboration amongst the different academic centers to provide services and subspecialty expertise that might not be available at one site, which, does happen to a limited extent, but not enough, I think. So, again, the labor statistics say that we are going to be growing pretty quickly. So if you got 30,000 radiologists now, a 4% growth would really mean that you're going to be at 40,000 radiologists in the next 10 years. So the major players, again, these are, the guys that are really out there: Rad Partners, Envision, RadNet. Mednax just got bought out by Rad Partners. And again, this is the kind of money that I'm saying, is really out of reach of any one radiology practice. I mean, you've got $1 billion acquisition, with Rad Partners taking over Mednax. And again, with their scale, they can really alter the value proposition, right? I mean, they can really determine how a lot of radiology gets practiced. Of course, all is not rosy, because Moody's, the health rating or the financial rating firm, kind of cautioned about their acquisition of Mednax. It's subject to significant execution risk. And this is Envision Radiology. So Envision is not just a radiology firm, but it's it's physician services. It also does ER. It also does anesthesia. And they've also got over 1,200 radiologists, and I'm sure they've got more than that, even as we speak. Is everything good? Well, not really, because this is where these folks end up in trouble, right? Because they're looking at the bottom line. So the CEO was let go last year because they were balance billing, and they were not providing patients the appropriate heads up that they are going to be balance billing, and these balance bills were in the hundreds of dollars, not just 30 and 40 bucks. So they came in trouble, but some of that practice still happens. And again, like I said, not all of these practices are bad. Envision Healthcare actually started an online board review course for residents, because they've got a lot of retired or transitioning to retirement physicians from academic practices that are leading this change. So not all of them are as bad as they would want to be or can be. So I think just summarizing this person's opinion, which is really, I think this is going to keep happening. The practices are going to keep getting coalesced and consolidated. And I think academic practices are also going to be rethinking how they practice. A lot of you fortunately, unfortunately, are going to end up working for one of these groups, or maybe somebody different. This is just how our world of medical care is going to evolve over the next 10 to 15 years. So be ready, be prepared, and and start learning about it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Contractor. Dr. Mahoney, I have stopped sharing, so you should be able to share your screen for your presentation.
All right, are you able to see my screen?
Not yet, no. Yes, now we are.
All right, are you seeing my artificial intelligence slide?
Yeah, but we're seeing it as the slide presenter view.
All right, let me swap screens then.
Hey, Mary, I think if you go to display settings on the top there, you'll have the option to change it. Yeah. Try that one first and then, yeah.
Yep, that's got it.
Oh, great. Thank you, Alyssa. And I apologize. I'm signed in as Eric England. I am not Eric England. Hello, everyone. My name's Mary Mahoney, and I'm the chair at University of Cincinnati's Department of Radiology. And I guess my first disclosure, which you may not have, you've probably already figured out, is that I am going to talk to you about artificial intelligence, but I am not one of these techie people. I am a radiologist, and I'm going to speak to you without a whole lot of informatics background about artificial intelligence. So what I'm going to talk about is basically trying to dispel this myth that radiology is going to cause our specialty to cease to exist. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. As a specialty in radiology, we've always been at the forefront of technology and have embraced it 100%. And I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so demonstrating that to you. All right, so artificial intelligence has really captured the imagination and the attention of the healthcare industry in recent years. It's been around and very much entrenched in the business world for quite a long time, but only more recently has it entered into the healthcare world. And these are systems that are going to change the way clinicians work, not just radiologists, but all clinicians. And mostly, I believe they're going to help us by boosting our efficiency. They're going to help our workflows and ultimately improve patient care. When we talk about AI, you'll hear a lot of different terms: machine learning, deep learning, artificial neural networks. But what I'm going to use the term artificial intelligence in this talk today, because that's really pretty much the umbrella or the more overarching term that encompasses all of the others. So how does AI work? The systems work by learning in quotes, if you will, by sorting through massive amounts of data. And they learn what data elements are related to various diseases. And then specific to radiology, they need to learn what imaging features are important and which imaging features go with which diseases. So by repetitively going through massive data sets, the algorithms are able to organize, categorize, again, learn in quotes, if you will, which features go with which diseases, which commands, and so on and so forth. But it takes an enormous amount of data. Now, I know you guys probably feel like this guy some days, but it's the way AI works is very similar to the way we teach you as students and residents. And as difficult and as overwhelming as all of this looks and feels to you, Computers actually go through data sets much, much, much more robust than this. And they're able to assimilate all of this data to a point that humans really can't. Even after 4 years of medical school, a computer is able to much more quickly go through a lot more data. All right, so then the data that the computers go through allow us to build these interconnected algorithms, and allows the computer then to take on a new problem, sift through its database, make all the connections and all of the similarities, categorize, as I said earlier, and come up with an output. It looks pretty complicated, but it looks entirely more orderly than what the human brain looks like. So is it better? Is this better than this? I'm going to tell you no, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So computers are already capable of learning complex multidimensional patterns. They're already driving cars. They're already monitoring financial data, looking for fraud, translating languages, using facial recognition. In 1997, as far back as that, IBM's Big Blue computer was able to beat the reigning world chess champion, and that's Garry Kasparov that you see here. And then in 2013, IBM's Watson computer was able to beat the 2 reigning Jeopardy champions. So we know computers can do a lot, but is Watson going to take over our jobs? Are computers going to be reading our images? Are robots going to take the place of radiologists? And the answer is a resounding no. Watson is not going to take over our jobs. Computers are definitely going to help us work more efficiently. They're going to remove many of the mundane tasks that we do. They are able to perform very simple tasks like identify pulmonary nodules. So you have a chest CT, you've got lots and lots and lots of thin slices, cross-sectional images of the chest. The computer can go through and pull out the individual slices that contain a nodule, save the radiologist an inordinate amount of time, but the radiologist still has to look at that nodule and decide what to do with it. Patients with liver lesions, metastatic patients getting multiple CAT scans. The computer can go in and measure all of those various liver lesions, compare it to all the prior studies, and again, save the radiologist an inordinate amount of time. But it's not the same thing as the computer actually interpreting what the changes in those liver lesions mean compared to the prior study, or making any real diagnoses. So the human visual system and brain have extraordinary abilities. We're able to work with incredibly noisy data. We're able to assimilate disparate information, intuit unexpected results, conjure up alternative scenarios, and at the end of the day, basically solve incredibly complex problems that are pretty common in medicine and are beyond what can be taught in just a computer algorithm. All right, so I told you I'm not a particularly technical person other than just being a radiologist, which I think is technical in and of itself. But let's just look at a very simplistic example of how AI works. So we train the computer, we show it lots and lots and lots of images to help it understand what's an apple, what's an orange. They're both kind of round, they both got a stem, they both have a leaf. This one's orange, it has a little bit of a different surface. This one's red. So the computer can handle apple versus orange pretty easily. Then we can maybe advance that algorithm and start to improve it and refine it and teach the algorithm that apples don't have to just be red. They can be green, they can be yellow, we can have different kinds of apples. And the computer can learn that that is still an apple and not an orange. This is where things get a little bit tricky for the computer. The computer falls apart here. There is no algorithm that can teach a computer what it looks like when you take a bite out of an apple. And yet a 3-year-old could tell you that that's an apple and not an orange. So there are things that computers can help us with, but they can't take over our jobs. One of the biggest problems facing physicians today, all physicians, is the overload of too much patient information. Basically, that is due to the electronic medical record. There's so much accumulation of data for each particular patient, whether it's imaging data, exams, reports, medications, lab values, pathology, implantable devices, wearable devices, admission transfer data. There is so much in the medical record today. And dealing with all of the data has been like drinking from a fire hose. It can be quite overwhelming. It can be impossible to go through all that data and pick out what's easily, what we need, what's clinically relevant, what's actionable, and it's easy for things to fall through the cracks. And when you talk about the increasing volumes that we have, it can be really hard. So, and again, I have to say this is for all physicians. This is where AI is going to play a key role for us. It's not going to be diagnosing patients, replacing doctors. Robots are not going to be seeing patients in the clinics or in the emergency room, but it's going to augment our ability to find the key relevant data that we need to care for our patients. And again, it's going to affect every field and specialty in medicine. So this is a terrific book by Bob Wachter. He's the chair of internal medicine at UCSF. And he wrote this book a couple of years ago, The Hope, Hype, and Harm of the Dawn of Medicine's Computer Age. And it's interesting, he devotes an entire chapter of the book to radiology. And he says that because radiology is so far ahead of other medical subspecialties in terms of our use of technology and our digital transformation, that we're really the canary in the coal mine for all of the other changes that are happening through computers and through technology in the rest of the medical industry. So I'm really going to show my age here, but when I was in training, radiology was the hub of the hospital. We really were the main focus of the rest of the hospital. Every team would round up on the floors and then head down to radiology. And you knew if it was 9 o'clock, it's the SICU that's coming. If it's 10 o'clock, it's 7 Northwest that's coming. Every single team would round on the floors and then come down to X-ray. And that really went away with the advent of PACS. PACS really eliminated radiology rounds because the clinicians didn't need to come down to X-ray any longer to see their images. All right, so what's happening in the rest of the hospital? I said we're the canary in the coal mine. So if radiology isn't the hub anymore because of PACS, what's going on the floors? So instead of the teams rounding, like we used to see here, they're empty. The halls are empty. There are no physicians on the floors anymore. And this is due to the digital transformations occurring in other medical areas. There aren't doctors in the halls anymore because they are not tethered to the floors by paper charts. They are not hanging out in the nurse's station, writing in the paper charts any longer. This is what they are now. They're all attached to their computers and not to their patients. So the same changes we're starting to see throughout the rest of the hospital. All right, back to radiology. The main factors that are driving change today in the field of radiology are the demand for more images, more quality, better efficiency. So radiologists today read about 20% more case volume than we were about 10 years ago. And our images are about twice as many images per study. So we're kind of getting to the point where we're maxed out, and any further gains in clinical efficiency are going to require that we use these new technologies to become more efficient. So let's take an example. Go back to that chest CT. The radiologist opens a chest CT. History is chest pain, and that's really all we know. So AI can comb through the patient's history. It can give us all of the prior cardiac history. It can give us all the drugs that patient's on, any prior information related to coronary disease, heart failure, any prior imaging studies, recent lab tests. All of this can be brought to us at our fingertips immediately as we open up the scan in order to be read. So hopefully I've convinced you that AI is going to be really helpful to us. It's going to help us be much more efficient. It's going to give us data very quickly that we need to do our jobs and help us do our jobs better. This is a quote from Nick Bryan. He's a pretty well-known radiologist in the area of informatics. And he says, the fear that a computer will replace a radiologist is an oversimplification of what a computer can do and an underestimation of what the profession of radiology is. So what I think we need to do is change it around. And instead of talking about AI, artificial intelligence, we need to be talking about IA, intelligent assistance. So in summary, AI will definitely change radiology, but it will not replace radiologists. It's going to facilitate our workflow. It's going to improve our outcomes. And the stories that medical students are being told that radiology is not going to be around is just complete hooey. There's a difference between intelligence and being human, and the art of practicing medicine is uniquely human and cannot be performed by a robot. So I just in closing want to wish you all good luck through your journey through medical school. It's an amazing time to be a physician, amazing time to be in the field of medicine, particularly radiology. It's such a dynamic field. We have so many technology advances that keep us on our toes, keep it interesting. We keep developing new and better tools. And as the other two department chairs have already told you, I am absolutely thrilled beyond belief with the choice of radiology as a specialty. It's incredibly interesting and a very impactful field. So good luck and no worries. Radiology is going to be around for a very, very long time. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mahoney. So we'll have a little bit of time for questions before we move to the program directors. And I've got two questions already in the Q&A. If anyone else has a question, participants, please enter it in the Q&A and I'll ask the questions of the chair. So the first question was, it seems that there's a very high demand for radiologists, but there often aren't enough spots for all the people who are interested in going into radiology. So how are academic programs addressing this issue, and is there progress on establishing new radiology residencies or expanding the programs to train more residents? Dr. Oats, I know that we've recently expanded, so maybe I'll let you talk toward that, because certainly we have more demand for radiologists at UK than we have radiology trainees coming through the pipeline. And so how have we been trying to address that?
Yeah, thanks, Joey. So at UK, we are growing our program, our diagnostic radiology program, from 6 per year or 24 total to 8 per year or 32 total. And so we're about halfway there. You have to increase 2 every year. So we are growing our residency program to meet the needs of not just our institution, but Kentucky as a state. And the other thing that we're growing is not just the diagnostic radiology residency, but we're also growing the interventional. We have independent IR program with 2 trainees, but we will be looking at the integrated program at some point in the future. But also we're growing all these fellowships, and I was trying to emphasize that in my talk too, that fellowships are important. So again, I think it's not just about the residency, it's about the post-residency opportunities as well. And across the country, a few residencies have closed, but in general, residencies are either staying the same size or are growing. And there were many programs, interventional radiology programs that were created. So the number of radiologists is actually greater now than it was before, but it's still insufficient to meet the needs of the country. So it really is up to, I don't want to get in too much detail, but accredited residencies depend on funding from the government. And if the government is not able to create more funding streams to institutions to fund these residency programs, whether they be radiology or other residency programs, then the institution is really kind of caught in a financial situation. They might want to grow residency positions, but they don't have the funding from the federal government to do that. So that does constrain the ability to grow residency programs.
Dr.
But
Contractor.
at UK, we are growing our programs at UK. So,
Dr. Contractor, Dr. Mahoney, do you all have any input as well on attempts to expand? I'm sure you all are facing very similar pressures. So.
Yeah, we have 8 residents per year. We've just added, which I'm thrilled about, added our IR residency program and did not convert .DR spots to IR. So completely that was added on to, not instead of. And I will tell you that radiology is a hot market right now. We can't hire fast enough, which is a good problem to have. We're growing, and there aren't enough radiologists for me to hire. I have been hiring 5, 6, 7 radiologists a year, and I can't keep up with it. I need another 5 or 6, 7 radiologists this year alone. So the job market is fantastic for anybody going into radiology. Again, great problem to have unless you're the department chair trying to staff your department, in which case it keeps me up at night.
Yeah, so I echo that statement. We can't, find these people fast enough. But to go back, yes, we have also expanded our programs. Now approved for 4 more residents, and we've added 4 more fellowships over the past year. But there's only so many people that you can find and fill, at least on a faculty level. So I think we probably need, across the country, about 20-25% more training spots at all the centers to account for the 4%, 5% increase in demand that we have for faculty and practitioners. So that's just where we are going. I think we will need to expand even more in the next 5 years.
Another question was, what characteristics are programs looking for? I think we'll get into that with the program directors. And then there was a question directed to Dr. Mahoney about, AI will not replace radiologists, but will it reduce the number of radiologists needed in the future and affect supply and demand? And I kind of think you guys just touched on that. I mean, everyone in radiology right now knows, there is just way more demand for radiologists, and AI is making our life potentially easier. But Dr. Mahoney, do you want to speak toward that?
Yeah, I think we just keep growing, and AI is just a tool that we're going to have to use to be able to just maintain our efficiency. I also see that radiologists' role may start to change a little bit and actually expand. I view us, and this is not my term, but I view us as being kind of the diagnostic cockpit, leaders in medicine. I think that we're going to start getting into, and certainly Liz can talk about this, Dr. Oats, just some of the biomarkers, some of the radiopharmaceuticals that we're using, some of the starting to incorporate more of the therasonics and starting to use lab value, pathology value, and just becoming more of the diagnostic cockpit leaders and more in charge of a lot more information. And the more and more of this information that we start to assimilate and combine with our imaging data, the more AI, I think, is going to help us with that. So I don't see it as in any way, shape, or form, a diminishing of the number of radiologists that are going to be needed.
Yeah,
but quite the opposite.
There's a question that was saying, is there a difference in performance of radiology residents, medical, who do a medical internship, surgical internship, transitional year? Again, I think that's something that maybe the program directors could touch on, but in my experience, there is good data that shows that whatever first intern experience you have, there's not a lot of differentiation between people, and in general, and they also said, does doing a medical internship preclude you from the ESIR pathway? And it really doesn't, but we can talk about that. Though another good high level question, is job security in radiology protected from the expanding scope of practice from non-physician practitioners like nurse practitioners and physician assistants? As chairs, have you all seen any impact from, advanced practice people impacting radiology?
Well, I think that's a
Take it
very,
away.
I think that is a very high level question. And of course, advanced practice providers have really impacted in every aspect of medicine. I think less so in radiology, although there are, there are attempts to kind of nibble around the edges, as I will say. But I think radiologists are just really know so much more. My personal opinion is that an advanced practice provider would have to be an extremely exceptional individual to be able to do what radiologists can do. That's my opinion. There are some APP providers that will work in IR, of course. So I think that's really where the opportunity for and Dr. Contractor could speak to this because he's an IR, but that's, I think, really where the opportunity is for the APP is in the interventional realm, less so in the diagnostic realm, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, all the major IR groups do employ a bunch of, practice assistants, whether they're PAs or NPs. And I think it depends upon the model of employment. So if they're employed by a group directly, then you can bill and collect for them. But if they're employed by the hospital, then, then their services are sort of outside your billing scope. Having said that, I don't think there'll be an IR group that'll say, I'm going to just hire an NP and not worry about getting a radiologist, because at the end of the day, you do need the radiologist for the higher level procedures. The NPs can do the low level stuff, but they can take call, and they certainly can do a trauma embolization. So I think they're going to help us, and I think they do help us. We have 3 NPs, and and they're all very valuable to us. So I can't see a practice without them, but I'm not concerned that they are going to be replacing us or taking away our jobs, just because there's just so much to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. The really the only role for them in a radiology department would be an IR, and they're a benefit to us and not a threat. So I don't know if the person asking that question was asking, do they think that NPs could start reading images? And the answer is no, that just would never fly in terms of accreditation nationally or at a hospital local level.
I would agree with that.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Oats, Dr. Contractor, Dr. Mahoney. We really appreciate your time. All the presentations were great. I hope that the participants and attendees, got an idea of different practice patterns and different opportunities. We'll move on to the different program directors now. I'm not sure if one of the program directors has a formal talk. You guys can go first, or if you guys just want to generally speak. I know there's a lot of interest from the participants about what are you looking for in a radiology resident? How should you prepare yourself and move through medical school to make yourself an ideal candidate? And so that I think if Dr. Lee and Dr. Van Meter and really any of the different program directors or assistant program directors who are on want to kind of have just a general discussion about it, I'll kind of open that up. And if you have a more formal talk, let me know and we can let you go first and kind of give a start. Anyone want to start, I guess?
Hey, this is Jimmy Lee. I'm the UK Radiology Program Director. This is my first year as Program Director, so learning a lot as I go. But let me share, no, I'm just kidding. I was gonna say, let me share some slides, but the 3 program directors discussed beforehand that we were not gonna do a formal talk and we weren't gonna do that. So I'm just kidding about that. But anyways, welcome to everybody that's participating. It's really great to see this thing grow, not only with UK and Louisville and Cincinnati students, but really, I think there's students from all over the nation that are joining in. So we're really excited to see this thing grow over the years. And great job to Joey and the staff for continuing to keep this going even through the pandemic. We hope that we'll one day be together again physically. And we really, again, enjoy the talks and the FaceTime. with the chairs. I mean, it's really amazing that we can get the chairs to kind of buy in to come on a Saturday every year and spend time really encouraging medical students like yourself to think about radiology, because we really need to grow the profession in numbers and a lot in, you know, the diversity and inclusion. We'd like to see more and more diversity in the radiology workforce. I'll start out with a question that I get, and it wasn't really from the chat, but a question that I get a lot about for medical students is just research. Do I need to do research? Do I need to publish papers, do presentations to be competitive in radiology? And my canned answer, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, would be no. You don't really need to do that. You know, focus on being a radiologist. Focus on, focus on being a physician. Focus on doing well in medical school, performing well on different tests that may come up during the time, and really, you know, try to do your best on the STEP examinations, because across the nation, I know a lot of different programs really use the STEP examinations for kind of that first metric of gauging if medical students would do well in their program. But now, with the changes with the USMLE, I think, which I think are good changes to going to the pass-fail system, I think it probably is more important to do something that sets you apart, because now you will not have that kind of numeric metric to say, you know, you perform well on these standardized tests. Now you have to do something that says, I did pass the USMLE, but now I also am able to do medical school and do it well, and also do something on the side, so I can handle multiple things at one time. So you can do, you know, what I call formal research, where you're, you know, hypothesis driven. You have something that you're trying to prove. Those usually take a little bit more time. They're a little bit more risk reward. So a lot of people who have done research in the past, you've probably done some projects that didn't come out. So there's a lot more time investment in those things, but the reward is really great. But there are opportunities or situations where you spend a lot of time and nothing happens. The other things that can definitely help you is a lot of residents and faculty are willing to take and like to take medical students through things like case report, RSNA, which you've heard about a little bit. The Radiologic Society of North America has recently started something called the Case Collection Series, which a lot of our medical students have taken advantage of. And there are a lot of faculty members that will take you through that. So, so to answer that question, if it comes up later, yes, I think there is something now, and it is beneficial to have something else on your resume when you go and apply for radiology, especially with the changes to the board examination, which the USMLE examination, which again, I think are good and important changes.
I'm wondering if we should all introduce ourselves just so everyone has a kind of general idea.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. Yeah, go. I think that's.
So I'll just start, and then we can answer more questions and be as interactive as possible. But my name is Eric England. I'm the program director at the University of Cincinnati.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Tracy Van Meter. I'm the program director at the University of Louisville.
I'm Elisa Campy. I'm one of the associate program directors at the University of Cincinnati with Eric.
I think I've already introduced myself. Jimmy Lee, UK, PD.
All right, let's see. So I guess probably all the panelists can see the question and answer session, but I'll go ahead and kind of raise some of the things. So one of the number of international medical graduates matching into radiology is somewhat low, and this person is asking, do our programs consider international medical graduates, and how would someone who's an international medical graduate sort of approach radiology application or applying to radiology?
I'm happy to start with that question. By no means are IMGs necessarily eliminated from the application process. I know every year we interview several IMGs and have matched IMGs in the past. So that being said, it is a little bit more difficult coming from overseas. I think some of the important factors are kind of reaching out to programs in meaningful ways and finding similar common interests between either yourself, your research, and the institution that you're requesting an interview or to getting to know a little bit further. Obviously, having connections with certain areas, being an IMG, have had several who've had additional family in certain areas and reasons for interest in certain institutions is important as well. But I think the most important thing is reaching out and making yourself known as far as the reason why you're interested in radiology, why you're interested in particular programs, what you can offer that program, and their spots are out there. So you just have, I think you have to be proactive about reaching out.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I think that our program certainly interviews and matches international medical graduates. And where I trained also at WashU, we certainly had people who were international medical graduates as well. So certainly it's a difficult pathway, but I don't think there are any doors that are closed to anybody just because of that. So someone else here said that for Match 2023, and this is kind of an interesting dilemma, some people will have a numeric step 1 score if they took the exam early, but then some people who maybe took the exam a little bit later will have a pass-fail. So how will you all as program directors approach applicants, some of which have pass-fail and some of which have a numerical score? That's certainly an interesting dilemma that will be somewhat exclusive to that match cycle.
I can go ahead and answer. I feel like in those instances, we will not really be looking at the numerical score. We will just consider that as a pass in order to keep it an even playing field for all applicants.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think most program directors in radiology are already starting to gain the mindset of looking at the entire applicant and not necessarily the step score. At least certainly the step score is becoming, I've seen over the past 5 years, probably a less important factor when considering the overall candidate. And I think that the transition to pass fail is kind of the culmination of that kind of thought process and how we evaluate candidates. So I honestly don't think it will make a difference at all, because we'll know that the majority of applicants will be pass fail, and I don't think it's fair to rate someone higher or lower based on the fact that they would have a numerical score. In my mind, I would treat it as kind of a pass fail, as I would treat the regular people who are taking pass fail.
Yeah, I would agree with what has been said as well. I mean, I think the only fair way to do it is to just look at it pass fail. So, and like Eric said, I think we've all transitioned to making the numeric score less and less important, because really it's just, did you pass the test or did you not? And those are the things that help us know that you'll succeed as a radiologist.
I did. Dr. Khurana did want to pipe up about the international medical graduate. So he's actually in that, and he wanted to just speak briefly about that. So Dr. Khurana, do you want to talk about your experiences?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. So I'm not in the program director pathway. I'm one of the course directors for the 4th year radiology elective at University of Kentucky. And I'm an IMG myself, so I wanted to kind of just briefly talk about it. I did my med school outside of the United States. It was hard, but it was not impossible. And I think the reason it was not impossible was you do need to show some research, but you do need to show that you are dedicated towards a program. So as Dr. England mentioned, Dr. Lee mentioned, I think showing your contacts that you are interested in a geographic area definitely helps. I did my residency and fellowship in California is because I was doing research there. So I think it's not impossible to get into a program. It is hard. And I think doing more than doing some research, and showing that you are interested in a specific geographic location would definitely help you. And I can tell you sometimes just being not in that geographic location could hurt you as well. So when I was in California and I was interviewing all over, I bet you I interviewed at applied to University of Kentucky, and they did not look at it because they were like, well, you're sitting at Stanford, California. Why are you coming here? So I think that can sometimes hurt you. But I would say, keeping at it, talking to the program directors, doing some research work with the faculty members at the institution you really want to match. And it's hard because you want to match at any residency program. But those would be my 2 cents for people who are IMGs and interested in matching in radiology. And I've known many friends who have done that. So I think you guys are going to be successful. So good luck.
So on to the next question here. Somebody had asked, in a match cycle, and I guess this year it won't be relevant just because we're going to be all virtual this year. But in the future, we can see that there may be a time where we have both in-person interviews and virtual interviews. And this attendee was wondering if you think that applicants who opt for a virtual interview would be at a disadvantage over somebody who opted for an in-person.
I'm happy to start with that one. And to be honest, our program was thinking about doing a hybrid at the end of last year before the Delta variant really took over and made it pretty much impossible to do that. In addition to, our Association of Program Directors in Radiology also coming out with a statement, and multiple graduate medical education, GME programs also saying that there be no in-person. But the future is definitely out there. I think we have to look at what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of interviewing in person and interviewing virtually. And for me, I was always befuddled by it because I knew each individual person had unique personal circumstances. And, just because they weren't able to come in person and had to do it virtually, to me, in my mind says, I'm thinking through this, really, wouldn't play a role just because there's unique situations for all applicants. I mean, I think, for example, applicants from Cincinnati who are applying to UC, well, do they really need to interview in person since, they're actually, they're very familiar with the surroundings? Can they just do it virtually? So it's kind of the opposite of what you might think of people, from different geographic areas who can't necessarily travel also doing it virtually. So there's a variety of reasons, in addition to, as we strive for, diversity and inclusion in the field of radiology, interviewing and traveling is very expensive. And I think that's an important thing to consider as well. And people might not have the means to go as far and, to travel and interview at distant locations. So there's a lot of things to take into account. And I think, it's something that if we're cognizant of, like understanding each applicant's kind of unique situations and why they may choose virtual versus in person. At the same time, I also see people who maybe have never been to the city of Cincinnati, and I want to actually experience the city before I commit myself to 4 or 5 years or even 6 years of an education. So, I understand that reason, but, to me, does that make them more likely to match at my program? I don't think so. I take each applicant individually, and whether we're interviewing virtually or in person, to me, wouldn't make a difference in the overall decision process on whether, where to place an applicant. So maybe some of the other PDs can speak to that, but that's kind of my own, personal opinion on the subject.
Yeah, I totally agree with Dr. England here. I feel that The only disadvantage, there would be no disadvantage in terms of the way the interview goes, whether it's virtual or in person. But if you're an applicant that really wants to get the feel of what it's like to be in the program, or get to know some of the kinds of residents that there may be in the program. For example, on virtual interview days, you probably wouldn't be able to meet all of the residents, but if you came in person, you most likely would meet the majority of them. You can't go on a hospital tour or see what the city is like. But again, everyone's circumstance is different, and the interview itself would not, in my opinion, would not be impacted whether it was virtual or in person.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to know exactly how I would react to the differing experiences. Like if it is virtual and I have one person in person, it could be different. So it's hard for me to predict how I'm going to react to that. But my hope is that it would be a level playing field for all applicants in my mind. But I really don't know how I would react in that setting. I do agree with both the other program directors that it's really, especially if you're not familiar with the area, it's really beneficial to you to check it out. And one of the big things that I think that you're struggling with as a program or as an applicant is just trying to figure out if you belong in that area, you belong with the residents. And that's something that's harder to feel virtually. And I think that's going to be a challenge for all of us to allow you to feel get a feel for our residency program virtually. I mean, I think that's something that it's a challenge for us. And it's something that I know that some of the programs around, including some of the ones on this call, do something like a kind of a virtual open house where you can come and just meet with the residents beforehand. But that's going to be our challenge this year and going forward, to give the applicant more of a feel of what our city's like, what it is to live here, and also just what our residents are like.
All right, that's great. So we're starting to get a lot of questions now. One of the themes that I'm seeing is, some uncertainty around this transition to pass fail. And I know we talked about it a little bit already, but what keeps coming up is people, in the past, I guess if you had a very high step 1 score, you may not take step 2 before you apply. But now that step 1 will be pass fail and step 2 will remain a number, would you recommend people taking step 2 and having that number on their application? How will that feed into your decision-making process? Will step 2 scores sort of substitute for step 1?
Well, that's a great question. And I think it's going to vary between programs, to be honest with you. I think different program directors still, would approach it different ways. What I can say is the specialty as a whole, though, we are transitioning away from these numbers. If you go to our national meetings, especially among program directors, there's a big emphasis in, the applicant's clinical work, their leadership, their volunteerism, a lot of other facets of the applicant. That being said, I think there are programs out there that would look towards step 2, and it's documented in the literature. Like there's a lot of literature research out there right now, and I think even more recently in the JACR about what our program director is going to look for in applicants when the step 1 it goes to pass fail, and step 2 is still going to play a role. So I think for now it's still a good idea. It would be a good idea to take it early. I will say that most applicants tend to do well on step 2 or better than step 1. So in the past we haven't really relied on step 2 as much as step 1. In the future, will step 2 go pass fail? I think that's something that's being considered out there. And if I had my crystal ball and could predict, I think probably it will. But for now, we are living the reality where step 2 is going to be out there, and the number is going to be out there. So I think it does behoove people to take it earlier and have that number out there. I can say for me personally, though, it probably won't still play a big role in my decision whether to, interview an applicant or not, but that's probably not universal across the program director landscape. So.
Yeah,
All right,
I
another-
agree with,
Oh, go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, I agree with Eric. Overall, I think that was really good advice that Eric gave to say, take the test, because some programs will look at it. But personally, and I think Eric, I agree with Eric, it never really has played a big role in our decision-making at UK.
All right, another good question. So what are good ways to show interest in a specific program? Would you recommend sending a letter of intent, or do you have any other tips for how to engage a program and really demonstrate your interest in one program?
I can go ahead and answer that. If it's I'm assuming, another program you may have an interest in aside from your own home institution. A lot of times I will get some very kindly worded emails from interested students or applicants in the program. I always read those emails, and many of them, if, giving that as a personal touch or showing, I'm interested in your program for these XYZ reasons is always kind of a nice, good idea. We've had some applicants call the program coordinator directly, showing their interest, and that can also be a nice way to kind of leave your mark on a program. Letters of intent, I don't know that I've ever seen one. I don't know that that's a bad idea. But I think just, sending a nice email or a phone call.
Yeah, I'll agree with all of that. I think, just to reiterate, I think the program coordinator is really key. They're kind of the gatekeepers to a lot of what us as program directors see. And I think reaching out to them, especially with, reasons for interest, maybe your husband is already a resident at a certain at the program, and that is really driving you to want to be at that program, so you don't have kind of a long distance type relationship. Those type of reasons are important. And I would also say, do your due diligence in understanding what are the missions and aims of this department or program that you're interested in. Do they align with a lot of your missions and what you see for yourself becoming in the future as a radiologist? Finding those commonalities and showing that you have actually shown interest and researched the institution, and that kind of extends over to the interview period. Make sure when you're interviewing that you're very familiar with the program, what you like about the program, what's new and innovative that program is doing. And I think, that just really shows that you've gone the extra mile in liking and desiring this type of this institution or wherever you're applying.
Yeah, and just to echo that, and to give applicants some insight. So most of us get over 700, 800 applicants a year. So it's really hard for us to distinguish one person from another. So if you're really interested in a program or an area, then let us know. And that's one of the entire reasons that we do this Rad FLiCKs, is that we want we want UC students, we want U of L students, we want UK students to all know that there are these 3 different programs that are available to them in the area. So just let people know, if you have, if you're not one of these regional medical schools, let us know that you attended Rad FLiCKs and you are interested in our program because you did that, because that gives us a little bit more insight of why, somebody from Florida is applying to Kentucky or to Cincinnati or Louisville. So just give us a little bit of insight into why you're applying to our program.
We touched on this a little bit, but I think this is, a really great question for you guys. So with step scores kind of going away, and can you just talk about, so say you're a M1 student, this is the first semester of your medical school career, but you're interested in radiology, how would you approach medical school, and what would you do to make yourself, the ideal candidate for radiology when you're a fourth year?
I'm happy to answer this one and just give my 2 cents on it. I think the best thing to do as you're an M1 or a medical student is to really put your whole self into the journey. So commit yourself to trying to be the best doctor you can be and follow your interests. If research is not your interest and public service is your interest, commit yourself to public service. Do things that make you feel whole and complete and have leadership positions in those roles, because those will look just as favorably as doing some research. And particularly if you're doing empty research without any of your interest or passion behind it is empty. So I would say really commit yourself to your journey and try to do things that interest you and do it to the best that you can. The other thing that I want to say, as we move away from the scores, programs will be looking at other things, and we've always looked at these things, but maybe these things will now hold more weight for certain programs. So comments from your rotations. Are you a team player? Did you go the extra mile? Did you help out? Did you, meet a patient's needs above and beyond? These are things that I think all programs should be looking for and will be looking for as we move away from the numerical scores. It's really trying to see who's stellar, who's outstanding. The end.
I also agree with everything that Alyssa said. The approach that I've always taken in looking at applicants has been kind of looking at them as a whole and looking for quote unquote well-roundedness. Radiology residency is mentally and intellectually challenging, of course, but we look for applicants that don't just study. You want to have something on your application, like she said, that you're passionate about, that you have another outlet that you can look towards when you're a resident, because as I said, residency is hard, and we focus more nowadays on wellness and resident wellness, and making sure that you would be a resident in the program that can not only succeed academically and pass your boards, but that you have other things that you kind of are interested in and can do that kind of will let you have that wellness in your life as well. So we're always looking for applicants that are very well-rounded and do other things as well as, being academically strong.
I'll just add one more thing real quick, is that it's never too early to reach out to the radiology department. I know depending on your institution, some of your exposure to radiology might be limited, especially in your R1 and R2 years. And certainly, if you're lucky enough to know that radiology is for you at this point in your career, or even you're considering radiology, but you're not committed to it yet, reach out to the medical student clerkship directors, or the program directors, the program coordinators at your institution, and just, are there opportunities to shadow? Are there kind of educational posters or research projects that, I'm interested in, but I don't know if I'm, but I want to get more of a feel for what radiology is through these other things. So there's lots of different ways to get involved, but I think reaching out early on, even if you're not 100% sure to radiology, to help, cement some of these interests is a great idea.
Yeah, and I work, I was just going to say, I work with a bunch of first and second year medical students, and I agree completely. And I forget your name as the associate program director, so I apologize, but I completely agree with what you said about just be the best medical student that you can be, because really our best radiologists are good doctors. So learn everything that you can during the first 4 years of medical school, be a good doctor, and that will translate into being a good radiologist.
So there's a good question, and this just came up in one of my meetings with the OME. that I hadn't heard about until this year, and so it's preference signaling. So I don't know if the program directors. So I heard that you'll be able to send signals to programs that indicate, like after you've interviewed, that I don't know if it's one signal or multiple signals, but it's like a way of, through the application process, officially saying, hey, you're one of my favorite programs. Are you all aware of this, or how this is going to be impacting the application process?
Is it like a wink or a secret handshake or something? What is the formal signal?
Well, no, it's literally like and it may only be rolling out in some specialties. It may not be in radiology yet, but the application process is moving to this like official signal, where once you've applied to programs and you've developed your rank list, you can signal that you are my favorite program, or you are one of my favorite programs.
I've never heard of the signaling. What I have heard that there's discussions with for the future is, having an application timing where, you can only, your top 10 programs that you can apply to in a certain calendar window, like for maybe the first 2 weeks you apply to, everyone can apply to 10 radiology programs. Then after that, you can apply to many, many more, which kind of gives the intent that these are my top 10 programs. Obviously, this is just, kind of hypothetical speak and ideas that were being generated. That's the only thing I've heard about it. But obviously nothing has come out, like that I've heard about officially, wink, wink, nod, nod type.
The one thing I will say, at least for us at the University of Cincinnati, is we have gotten these emails that say, oh, I'm ranking you #1, you're my top program, or you're in my top 3. And it's always nice to hear that, but it doesn't necessarily change our process or our rank. The only thing I think it does for us is kind of help us know where we might go down our list, but it doesn't really influence. And Eric, I mean, I know in this situation, but feel free to add in, but it won't move anyone up or down. It's nice to hear. We love getting those emails. It makes us feel good. I think as an applicant, I think it can't hurt. So I wouldn't recommend sending them to 20 programs, and I wouldn't recommend lying about it, because at the end of the day, if you say I'm ranking you #1 and you're matched to rank, and then you don't match there, that sort of in a small way kind of mars your integrity or your reputation, not like, on a global scale, but or maybe on a global scale. But yeah, so I wouldn't recommend lying, and I don't think there's anything wrong in sending programs your interest, but at least for us, it doesn't really, slide you up or down.
And on that note, somebody was saying, and we've kind of touched on this, but when would you, express your intent? Is this something you should express before the interview process, before the application process, after you've interviewed? When do you want to sort of start engaging a program to express your specific interest in that program?
I'll say kind of a general response to that, and it's going to be different for every program. And I don't think it moves the needle for a lot of different programs when we hear that you're specifically interested or ranking us, top 10 or whatever. But if it does make a difference to certain programs, then do it before their committee meeting. And it could be anytime along, before the committee meeting. And when is the committee meeting? And that may be a question that you ask for some of the program coordinators when you interview, because it's really hard because we make decisions by committee. And so if you email us before the rank lists have to be submitted, most likely we've already met. And so it's gonna, if it would change anything, and I think it's pretty clear that it doesn't change it too much for most programs, but it does make us feel better. But anyways, the simple answer is try to do it before the program committee meets and try to figure when that is.
I think the best way and to show interest in a program would be before the interview. In particular, if you haven't received an interview invite, you know, as Dr. Lee mentioned before, you know, we get, you know, hundreds upon hundreds of applications, and going through all of those applications, you know, some of them, you know, it's difficult to sort through every single one of them. And if there's a program on your list that you're very interested in and you haven't heard back from them, you know, a couple of weeks into the application season, it never hurts to send, again, a nicely worded email or a phone call to the program coordinator. And, you know, that does happen to us. And, you know, then of course we look at the application. And so I think that is kind of the best way to show your interest in a program. And you know, and I agree with the rest of the statements that if you're going to say, I'm putting you at the top of your list, or you're my number one, it really doesn't change the game for you. So I think that, you know, the best way is to express your interest before interviews begin.
Another thing that I would just emphasize, and we're about to move on to the program coordinator, but do not underestimate the importance of the program coordinators. They are absolutely essential to the functioning of the residency. They are our partners, and you should always treat them with kindness and respect, and make sure, you know, never underestimate how critical they are to the whole process, because they are absolutely an essential part of every residency program, and help with all facets of you know, training and application processes and everything. So it's very, they're essential people, and certainly always make sure that you engage them, are thankful and thoughtful when you're engaging them. So another question, this is kind of maybe the last one we'll get to, but it's a pretty loaded question, but it's something I've certainly thought about, is with the lack of kind of step 2 scores, and at UK, we're even going full pass fail for all our students. So you won't get a class rank, you won't have honors, you know, it is going to be pure pass fail with no differentiation of your students, and you will lose your step 1 score. Does that potentially lead to implicit bias, because you're going to now be using only subjective factors to like a 15-minute interview to choose your radiology residents? And so certainly there is the risk of that. How do you all as the program directors approach this potential concern of, you know, no longer having objective measures and potential implicit bias? And I'm sure that all of us are thinking of implicit bias. It's definitely a big thing in the radiology community and in medicine in general, and lots of people are getting trained for it. There's courses, there's, you know, so how do you all see that? I know that you're as program directors all conscious of this at this point. So how are you all going to approach this potential issue?
I was just typing an answer to the question, and then I tried to answer it live, so I kind of flubbed it. But anyway, just to give a brief answer, and then Eric, feel free to supplement me on this. One of the things that we do before the interview season is we encourage our interviewers to undergo the implicit bias testing, so that at least we are aware of our implicit biases. These are usually things that you can't get rid of, but if you're aware of them, then you can sort of reflect on your opinions, and are they subject to implicit bias? I mean, even Eric and I have had conversations about applications where I'm like, can you review this one? I feel like I'm not looking at this with clear eyes. But yeah, we're moving away from objective measures like scores, but there are things in the application that, while they are subjective, they are in some ways objective, like calling someone a team player or a hard worker. These are in their own way metrics. Someone's personal statement, again, it's subjective, but it gives you the impression of who the person is. So while yes, we're moving away from these very clear objective factors, there are lots of things in someone's application that can attest to the type of medical student they are, the type of person they are, and the type of potential future radiologist that they are.
All right, one last thing, and I can speak to this a little bit as coordinating the medical education at UK, but so if somebody goes to an institution that has limited radiology opportunities, and there are some places where there may not have a radiology residency, or they may not have the opportunity to do an elective in radiology at their institution, what can they do to reach out, to network, to shadow at other institutions? And one of the ways that, you know, at UK, we certainly have visiting students every year, but it is sometimes challenging to accommodate. You know, we often don't have enough, we have more demand for visiting students than we can accommodate. So how do you all, how would you advise a student with limited radiology at their institution to get exposure and experience for radiology in their application?
Go ahead, Eric.
Oh, I'll just say a few quick words. I think reaching out early on, either through email. I think there's a lot of radiologists and radiology program information out there in the social media world. You know, quick Twitter plug. Almost every program has a Twitter account, and you can learn a lot about programs, and you can learn a lot about the field, and even find mentors out there. I've seen a lot of students in that exact same position that just, you know, send out, you know, a request to the radiology community, looking for mentorship, looking for advice, and, you know, the radiology community has responds almost immensely. So those are just small opportunities, but I think they do help out in those type of situations.
Yeah, and on a local level, there is a radiologist there at your institution. So you can just, you know, seek them out, or, you know, wherever you may rotate, there will be a radiologist somewhere. If you're just trying to figure out, is radiology something I'd like to do? And most radiologists, even in the private or community world, are open to having somebody shadow for a couple hours, and, you know, that tell them that you're not going to be, you don't want to necessarily be with them all day, or you can't be with them all day, because some radiologists may fear having a medical student with them the entire day, but just say, hey, can I come by for an hour or two in the afternoon after my classes, just to see what radiology is about, because I think a lot of first years, you really should be in that open-minded exploratory phase. See, you know, consider every subspecialty. And if you're fortunate enough to stumble upon radiology this early in your career, that's great, because that's not the case for a lot of medical students. It's a very common, you know, personal statement that they didn't get exposed to radiology until their third year. So if you're an M1, M2 on this call, you know, reach out to the local radiologist and try to spend some time with them.
And there may also be opportunities for you if you get in touch with other, you know, programs that you may be interested in, for you to actually be involved in a research project or things like that as well.
And one thing I would like to say, you know, I advise a lot of, or all of the students who are UK medical students who are going into radiology about their application process and how to make themselves a good applicant. And one of the things I would also emphasize, even though we've talked a lot about how as an M1 or as an M2, you can be a great applicant, you know, going back to what some other people have said, just being a great medical student, right? Even if you don't decide you're going into radiology until the end of your third year or your fourth year, if you have succeeded in medical school, you've been passionate, you've had something that you've really contributed to and committed to over time, don't be worried that, oh, it's now the end of my third year and I just decided I might want to go into radiology. Don't let that hold you back. You know, I think that you can, as long as you've been successful and you've really been passionate and done a great job in medical school, if you decide in the end of your third year, even I've had 2 students who just decided they wanted to do radiology. And I think that I still encourage them, and I don't discourage them at all from applying, especially when they're, you know, have a strong application and have been successful. I think that, you know, you don't have to have had a laser focus on radiology the whole time, as long as, like Alyssa said, you really succeeded and were passionate and involved in your medical school and had some leadership opportunities or research or whatever it was that was your passion, that comes through on the application, and you'll still be a strong applicant even if you didn't shadow a whole bunch of radiologists. So I think that you shouldn't be discouraged from applying or looking at radiology, even if you come to it later in medical school. All right, guys. Well, with that, we're at the noon hour. So I am going to share the program coordinators video. The program coordinators put together a video that is very practical. It's going to, communicate to you a lot about the interview process, and has a lot of very nice information. I think you all will find it to be quite useful. Let me. A little bit tricky to figure this out here. Let's see here. Share screen. Let's see. I guess, are you all able to hear that? Can somebody pipe up and just make sure that?
No, we're not able to hear it.
No. Let me see. I may have to share the sound. This is some advanced Zoom webinaring here. Hold on. Share sound. All right, let's try that again.
Applying and interviewing. Virtual residency.
Can you all hear it now? There's no sound at the moment, but
It was still low, Joey.
The University of Cincinnati, the University of Louisville.
so you're saying it's quiet?
It's quiet. Yeah.
I've got my sound all the way 100%.
What about that bottom left on the screen?
Residency program interviews.
Yeah, that's the same one.
The traditional method of in-person interviews has gone to the wayside, and a virtual platform has moved in as the main
Well,
method of interviewing.
people just have to, I guess, turn up their volume.
Digitally, you should still gain the same knowledge about the programs through virtual interviews as you would an in-person interview. The ARIS timeline has changed again this year, but all other factors of the application process remain the same. It's important to remember that residency programs may begin reviewing applications on September 29th. Applications submitted on or before September 29th will display an application date of September 29th. Any applications submitted after that date will be stamped in real time. After a year of virtual interviews, a few lessons learned, and a lot of research, we've compiled a list of 10 interview and application tips from a coordinator's perspective. Our first tip would be to test your technology. Make sure that your computer is working and has an updated version of the meeting application or software that the program is using for their recruitment. You should also ensure that your internet connection is secure and reliable. Another tip is to be prepared with phone numbers of coordinators so you can quickly transition to a phone call in the event that your computer or internet link fails. You should also confirm that there is no echo or feedback from other microphones that may be plugged into your device that you are using. When interviewing, speak slowly and enunciate clearly, as the internet connection and microphone issues can degrade the sound quality. Our second tip would be to arrange your space. Be sure to organize the room that you're interviewing in so that your camera does not show anything you do not want the interviewers to see. Be sure to turn off your camera in between interviews and during breaks so as not to highlight an empty chair. Pay attention to your lighting and test different camera angles to ensure your face is not in a shadow. Most importantly, ensure a quiet location. We recommend posting a Do Not Disturb sign outside of the door at the location that you are interviewing. You should ask your institution if there are designated spaces with good lighting, Wi-Fi, and soundproofing. Tip number 3 is to limit your distractions. Be sure to mute your phone and computer alerts and avoid multitasking during the interview. Try to block your schedule for at least 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after your interview in order to be on time and stay present for the entire interview. If you have a series of interviews with different programs, consider taking the entire day off to minimize distractions. It's important to keep in mind that personal mannerisms such as scratching your head or face and adjusting your hair can become more noticeable when you're being viewed on camera. Even these small, simple movements can become distracting to interviewers. Be sure that you're maximizing your eye contact by looking directly into the camera rather than at the computer screen. Some devices will allow you to move from one screen to the other, and be sure that you're viewing the interviewer on the screen in which your camera is located. During one-on-one interviews, there is no need to mute yourself. Doing so can cause awkward pauses in the conversation. When doing a group interview, please mute and unmute yourself to avoid background noise when other people are talking. Tip number 4, prepare for each interview. Be sure to review the program's websites before your interview. Programs will often have commonly asked questions listed on their websites, which will save you time from having to reach out to each individual program. Be sure to ask several questions that are specific to each program. We strongly recommend doing practice interviews in low-stakes settings, such as with a friend, with a mentor, or a faculty member that you trust to give you honest feedback. If you are unfamiliar with the area or institution, be sure to contact past or current residents to gather various perspectives on that program, institution, and city. We also recommend that you have your application materials on hand in case your interviewer asks you to share them on screen. Tip number 5, act professionally. This should go without saying, but please be on time for your interview. Be sure to check prior to the interview which time zone the program that you are interviewing with is in. Dress professionally for the interview and do not eat, drink, chew gum, or walk around during the interview. Basically, do the same thing that you would be doing if this were an in-person interview. If you're participating in a group interview, please be mindful of time sharing with others. Convey your responses completely and concisely. Tip number 6, build rapport. Be sure to say a proper and friendly hello to your interviewer. It's appropriate to smile and use a moderate number of hand gestures. Be sure to demonstrate interest in your interviewers, and if you're familiar with their work, consider asking them questions about that work. Remember, not only are the programs interviewing you, but you are also interviewing the programs, and it's important for you to be interested in the work that is being done at each program. Tip number 7, be sure to follow up. Send a thank you card or a thank you email to each interviewer. If you offer to send additional information or materials to an interviewer, please do so as soon as the interview is over. As the program coordinator, we get asked a lot if our interviewers prefer thank you cards in the mail or if a thank you email is sufficient. The answer is, it depends. It really depends on the interviewer's personality, and you should do what you feel is best after the interview. Tip number 8, cancellation courtesy. Please give programs advance notice if you intend to cancel your interview. Tips number 9 and 10 are application tips. So tip number 9, letters of recommendation. Please inform your letter writers which specialty application you are using their letter for. If you are applying to a diagnostic radiology residency program, for instance, you wouldn't want a letter for orthopedic surgery in your application for diagnostic radiology residency. If this is not your first year of residency interviews, please retain fresh letters of recommendation that are specialty specific. Tip number 10, writing your personal statement. The personal statement is your chance to highlight your personal strengths and characteristics. It's your opportunity to give the program some idea of who you are, your background, your goals, qualities that make you stand out prior to offering interviews. Your personal statement should include an introduction to who you are and what specialty you are applying to. It should describe what drew you to radiology, if there was a particular event that led your interest, and if so, describe it. It should also include your clinical activities, your research, or personal experiences that solidified your interest in radiology. Use these to highlight your strengths. Be sure to tell us your personal characteristics that make you well suited for radiology and what you will bring to the program. Let us know what you are looking for in a program, both clinically and academically, and let us know your future plans within the specialty you're applying to. Be sure to limit your personal statement to 1 page. Make sure you're using spell check and grammar check before you submit. Don't begin every sentence with I and avoid cliches. You also don't want to rehash your CV. Once you have a draft of your personal statement that you are happy with, be sure to ask your academic advisor, a radiology faculty member, your student affairs, career development office, or a close friend to read your personal statement and give you honest feedback. One last thing we want to talk about are virtual interview mechanisms that you may encounter and that you should definitely familiarize yourself with. We recommend that you review Zoom, Microsoft Teams, BlueJeans, and Thalamus prior to the interview season. All 4 of these programs have how-to and informational videos that you can find online. It's also worth mentioning that invitations to interview may not come through any of those platforms. Common ways to receive invitations are through ARIS directly, via interview broker, and sometimes even through a simple email from the program. Be sure to review and maintain your email, including your junk box, in order to avoid missing an invitation to interview. If you're looking for additional resources, I recommend checking out the AAMC website, specifically the Preparation Guide for Applicants and the Prep for Success in Your Virtual Interview, which is a pre-recorded webinar. You should also check out the UT Southwestern Medical School Virtual Residency Interview Checklist, which is where many of these interview tips came from. Coordinators from the University of Louisville, the University of Cincinnati, and the University of Kentucky are available to answer any questions that you may have.
All right, that's a great presentation. Something we probably should make available to everyone, maybe through YouTube, because there's a lot of very helpful tips. At this point, we can take some additional questions, and the coordinators can take questions and more generally, and then maybe we'll take questions for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have a break before we go to do some speed mentoring at 1 o'clock. So let's see, does anybody have any additional questions? I can also pull some questions probably from back in the other windows for program directors, because a lot of those were related as well. Let me see. Anybody have any new questions? All right, so somebody said, could you mention a few things that an applicant might do that a coordinator might find annoying or frustrating, so that they can avoid making those mistakes? Can anybody speak to some experiences that they've had that led to a bad impression, and how to avoid that, or how to not cause frustration for the coordinators?
Rose, do you want to go first?
Hey, Joy, I would recommend you're still screen sharing.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So I think personally, I'm Kristen from the University of Kentucky. I think personally, not giving us adequate amounts of time to respond to your emails is something that as coordinators is frustrating. We get a lot of emails during recruitment season, and we're sending a lot of emails during recruitment season. So just having some patience, giving us a few days, if it's not something that's like you need an immediate response to, just giving us some time to get back to you, I think.
Yeah, I think similarly, maybe also if you choose to cancel an interview, having appropriate notice is really helpful because there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes in terms of, rearranging schedules or even being able to extend an interview invitation to someone else who might want to interview at the program. So I would think that would definitely be something that we certainly appreciate if you can get enough notice for those things to occur.
Sally, I think that's such a good point because the other thing that it taps into is professionalism. If you're not being professional with respecting the program, respecting everyone's times, it doesn't speak well to you as an applicant. And in a lot of ways, it limits someone else from being able to come interview and visit. So 100% agree.
And to that point, you have to realize that radiology is a pretty small world. We all interact. We have a lot of professional relationships across many different institutions. So just because you're canceling an interview and you may not be interested in that institution anymore, it is still important to maintain your professionalism and show respect because there is a lot of interdepartmental, interinstitutional communication that goes on. So. Somebody said, what would be a good time for a follow-up email? So for example, after your interview, how quickly should you send a follow-up email, or when should you send that thank you note, et cetera?
Personally, I think it's nice to follow up right after your interview when kind of your impression is still fresh with everyone that you met. But I also think it probably doesn't hurt, particularly if your interview's earlier in the season, to maybe drop a second email later in the season, just to kind of remind everyone of who you are and your continued interest.
And on that note, approximately when do a lot of the committee meetings and decision making happen? I know somewhere in sort of January, February is when most committees, I believe, are meeting.
Yeah, for UK, our committee generally meets mid-January to late January.
That's the same with the University of Cincinnati. We meet about mid-January. So if you're really interested in the program, we would, like to hear from you, after your interviews are over. I think most programs are doing everything virtually and will be finished interviewing by early January. So continued interest in the program is always helpful to know.
Somebody's asking, Kristen, I think you had said, be patient on getting a response, and somebody is asking, well, how long should I be patient for? How, what is your turnaround time, I guess, and how long before you would, send a follow-up email, I guess, if you hadn't gotten a response?
I think this will probably come down to preference of each coordinator. For me, I like at least 1 or 2 days in recruitment season to be able to respond to you. So I think after 2 days, if you haven't heard from a University of Kentucky coordinator, I would go ahead and reach out again.
So overall, you guys are pretty efficient. 1 to 2 days. That hopefully people can be patient for 1 to 2 days, I would hope. Let's see. I'm trying to look back through the questions. I guess somebody had said, are all applications reviewed? I think a lot of people hear about a cut or, making that first pass through the applications. What is everyone's process for sort of going through that initial application, and how are those applications initially reviewed or screened?
So every single program is going to be different on this. I know that at the University of Kentucky, the coordinators don't review any applications. We don't do any screening for our program directors. Our program directors do the screening for us. So that's a question for our PD for UK.
I'm still on, so I'll answer. I don't know. This is my first year, and I'd like to say that I read everybody's application, but that may not be doable. Just realistically speaking, that years again, like we get 700 to 800, and I think we're getting more now that everybody is virtual. We're probably getting even more and more applications. So anything that you can do to make it, especially, just speaking frankly, if you're out of the region, if you're coming from California, like Dr. Brana had said, and you're applying to us, let us know why you're applying to Kentucky, because we just really want to know. Not sure if that came through okay.
Dr. Owen, you're muted.
So somebody is asking in terms of the timing of interviews and number of interviews, how soon after that September 29th do you all start offering interviews? About how many interviews do you think we'll be offering this year? And do those interview slots fill up quickly?
So for the University of Kentucky, we generally offer interviews. I mean, it may be different this year because we have a new PD, but typically about 2 weeks after the viewing opens is when we send our interviews. We will have 15 days of interviews total, and we'll have split sessions. So we'll have morning interviews and we'll have afternoon interviews again this year, like we did last year. I think last year we had around 150 people who interviewed with us, and I think we're going to do similar numbers again this year.
At Cincinnati, we have, this year we'll be interviewing on 10 days, 1 week in November and 1 week in December. We usually send out our invites the middle of October, and we interview approximately 12 people a day. We have just morning interviews. We'll start around 8:15 in the morning and interview up until noon. Then we have a noon conference, and then we have breakout rooms where the applicants can have some private one-on-one time with our residents.
All right. With that, I think that this has been a great session. I appreciate everyone for being here and contributing to the session. I think there's been a lot of very useful information for residents, for medical students who are interested in radiology and those that are going to be applying shortly. And I want to encourage everyone at 1 o'clock, we are going to be doing speed mentoring. So we'll have breakout rooms where you'll get the opportunity to interact with program directors, with residents, attendings from various specialties. Some of the chairs will be participating. So I think it'll be a really unique opportunity. I think last year, the people who did attend the speed mentoring session really enjoyed it, found it very useful. So that is a separate link. It will be a Zoom link that you will log into that was available on the PDF. And so you can log into that at 1 o'clock, and we'll spend about an hour, and you'll get maybe 5 to 10 minutes with the various participants. And we'll cycle through. So again, I really appreciate everyone's time today. I hope that the attendees found it to be a useful session, and we encourage everyone to go into radiology. It's an absolutely fantastic field. I think everyone who has participated today could attest to how passionate we all are about radiology, and that's why we're involved in academics, involved in this process. So again, look forward to seeing everyone at the breakout sessions at 1 o'clock. Again, it is a separate link that was available on the PDF. And any attendings or the people who will be the mentors of the speed mentoring session, when you do log in, if you could add like A to the front of your name or something to indicate that you're, or an M to indicate that you're actually one of the mentors as opposed to a mentee, that would be helpful in sorting people into breakout rooms. So again, thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing everyone at 1 o'clock. We'll have a short half-hour break. And good luck in medical school, and good luck in your application process. Again, we all hope that you become radiologists in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joey, for organizing this. It's really good.